A single sentence, spoken in a language he thought was his secret weapon, was about to cost billionaire Damien Blackwood more than just his pride. He intended it as a quiet, cruel joke to his business partner, a way to mock the seemingly insignificant waitress serving his $5,000 bottle of wine. He assumed she was just part of the scenery, another face he would forget by the time he stepped into his limousine. He was wrong. What he didn't know was that this waitress was a ghost, a woman who had walked away from a life of secrets and danger. And he had just spoken the code that would bring her past crashing back into the present right at his dinner table. The air in Aria, a 3 Michelin-star restaurant nestled in the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side, was thick with the scent of money and white truffle. It was a place where conversations were conducted in hushed tones, but deals worth millions were sealed with the subtle clink of crystal glasses. For Clara Evans, it was a gilded cage she had chosen for herself. For the past 2 years, this predictable high-stakes ballet of service was her sanctuary, her camouflage. At 28, Clara wore her waitress uniform like a suit of armor. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a severe regulation bun, and her face, which could have been striking, was practiced in its expression of pleasant neutrality. She was efficient, quiet, and invisible, precisely the qualities she had cultivated. No one here knew that just 3 years ago she wasn't carrying trays of beluga caviar, but rather state secrets. No one knew that her ear, which now listened for the subtle request for more water, was once trained to discern dialects from across the Levant and parse the coded language of diplomats and spies. Tonight, Table 7 was the center of the restaurant's universe. It was occupied by Damien Blackwood. Blackwood wasn't just wealthy, he was a force of nature, a titan of private equity with a notoriously sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. His presence sucked the oxygen out of a room. He was tall, impeccably dressed, in a custom Tom Ford suit with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to appraise and dismiss everything in a single glance. With him was a man named Mr. Faisal Al-Jamil, a potential investor from Saudi Arabia whose traditional thobe and gutra stood in stark contrast to Blackwood's Western tailoring. From the moment they sat down, Damien Blackwood was difficult. The water wasn't cold enough. The lighting was a degree too dim. He questioned Clara's knowledge of the wine list, his questions laced with a condescending disbelief that a girl like her could possibly understand the nuances between a 1982 and a 1985 Chateau Margaux. Clara handled it all with practiced grace. "An excellent choice, sir," she would say, with a small, unoffending smile. "The 82 has a more robust finish, but the 85 is considered exceptional for its balance." He smirked a flicker of amusement in his cold eyes before waving a dismissive hand and ordering the 82 as if to prove he knew better all along. Her manager, a perpetually nervous man named Robert, hovered nearby, his face pale. "Is everything all right, Miss Evans?" he whispered as she passed the sommelier station. "Perfectly fine, Robert. Mr. Blackwood is simply decisive." It was a lie. Everything was not fine. Damien Blackwood's presence felt like a storm front moving in. It wasn't just his arrogance. It was the restless, predatory energy that radiated from him, an energy she hadn't felt since her previous life, a life she had buried in a shallow grave in the Syrian desert. She returned to the table with the decanted wine, her movements fluid and economical. She poured a small amount for Blackwood to taste. He swirled the deep crimson liquid, sniffed it with an exaggerated air of a connoisseur, and took a sip. He held the wine in his mouth for a long moment, his eyes locked on Clara. It was a power play designed to make her uncomfortable. She held his gaze, her expression placid her heart a steady, slow drum against her ribs. She had faced men with guns. A billionaire with an ego was nothing. Finally, he nodded. It will suffice. As she moved to pour for Mr. Al-Jamil, Blackwood turned to his guest, and believing he was cloaked in the privacy of a foreign tongue, he began to speak in a crisp Levantine dialect of Arabic. "Forgive the mediocre service, Faisal," he said, the Arabic words flowing smoothly. "You have to understand, in this country, they let anyone off the street carry a tray. Look at her. She probably can't even count the change from a taxi fare." Clara's hand didn't tremble. The flow of the wine into the glass remained perfectly steady, but inside her a switch flipped. It was a sound she hadn't heard in years, a click of steel, the arming of a weapon she thought she had dismantled forever. He wasn't just insulting her. He was using a specific dialect, one she knew intimately from her time in Damascus. Mr. Al-Jamil gave a non-committal shrug. "She seems capable enough." Blackwood chuckled a low, dismissive sound. "Capable of what, spilling wine on my suit? It's a shame. We could be having this conversation in a more refined environment. But this deal requires a certain level of discretion. Speaking of which, we must ensure the transaction is as clean as the one with the Falcon of Damascus." Time stopped. The name. The Falcon of Damascus. It wasn't a name. It was a code name. A ghost. A dead man whose blood Clara felt was on her hands. The air in her lungs turned to ice. The bustling restaurant, the clinking glasses, Robert's anxious face, it all faded into a roaring silence. All that existed was that name hanging in the air between the two men, a spectre from a past she had nearly died to escape. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. How did Damien Blackwood, a New York private equity shark, know that name? A name that was known only to a handful of people in the highest echelons of the State Department and a few unfortunate souls in a Syrian intelligence prison. Blackwood, oblivious to the bomb he had just detonated, continued. "Her hands are probably rough from scrubbing floors. Try not to look at them." Clara finished pouring the wine. She placed the bottle on the table, the label facing Mr. Blackwood perfectly, as per her training. Her mind was a maelstrom of fear, anger, and 1,000 unanswered questions. "Stay invisible," a voice screamed in her head. "Say nothing. Walk away. This is your new life. You are Clara Evans, a waitress. You are safe here." But another voice, a colder, more dangerous one she hadn't heard in years, whispered back. "He knows the name. He is either a friend or he is the enemy who destroyed you. There is no middle ground." She straightened up, her posture shifting subtly. The meek servitude fell away, replaced by an unnerving stillness. She turned her head slightly, her gaze no longer deferential, but direct, meeting Mr. Al-Jamil's eyes. First, then settling on Damien Blackwood. She took a small, steadying breath, and then in the same flawless, educated Damascus Arabic, she replied. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. "The 1982 Chateau Margaux has notes of cedar and black currant." She began, her accent perfect, her grammar impeccable. "It pairs poorly with arrogance, but it may, if you're lucky, wash away the bitter taste of ignorance." She paused, letting the words land. Then she delivered the final devastating blow. "And for your information, sir." She added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, her eyes boring into his. "My hands are not rough, but they have buried men who knew the name you just mentioned." The silence that fell over table 7 was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to bend the very fabric of the restaurant's cheerful ambiance. Mr. Al-Jamil's polite smile froze on his face, his hand hovering over his water glass. The fork in Damien Blackwood's hand clattered onto his porcelain plate, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden void. Blackwood's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw was slack, his dark eyes wide with disbelief. The mask of the arrogant billionaire had been ripped away, leaving behind a man utterly exposed. He stared at Clara not as a waitress, but as if he were seeing a phantom. He was a man who controlled everything and everyone in his orbit, and this quiet, unassuming woman had just detonated a grenade in the middle of his carefully constructed world. Clara held his gaze for a long, charged moment. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird beating against a cage. Adrenaline, a feeling she had once lived on, coursed through her veins. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, defiant clarity. She had just set fire to her sanctuary. There was no going back. She gave a curt, professional nod. "Enjoy your meal, gentlemen." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her steps measured and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just unleashed. Every eye in her peripheral vision seemed to be on her, but she focused on a single point, the polished wood of the service door. As she pushed through it into the frantic, clattering world of the kitchen, she felt her composure begin to crack. She leaned against the cool, stainless steel of a prep counter, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The cacophony of shouting chefs and clanging pans was a welcome shield. "What was that?" She jumped. It was Maria, another waitress, her young face full of concern. "That guy at table 7, Blackwood, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Are you okay?" Clara forced a smile that felt brittle. "Fine. Just a spill. I need a moment." She didn't wait for a reply, quickly making her way to the small, cramped staff locker room. She splashed cold water on her face, her reflection in the cracked mirror, showing a stranger with haunted eyes. "What have you done?" the voice of reason screamed. "You had one rule: be invisible. You just lit a flare in the dead of night." The name, the Falcon of Damascus. It echoed in her mind. He was an asset, a high-level source inside the Syrian regime, feeding critical intelligence to the US Embassy, where she worked as a senior diplomatic translator. His real name was Tariq. He had a wife and 2 young daughters. Clara had been his handler, the voice on the other end of the secure line, the one who translated his whispered warnings into actionable intelligence for Ambassador Robert Hayes. And she was the one who translated the final garbled message before the line went dead. The message about a betrayal, a mole inside their own operation. 2 days later, Tariq was publicly executed as a traitor. Clara barely escaped Damascus herself, smuggled out in the dead of night with a new identity, and a soul scarred by guilt. Ambassador Hayes had retired in disgrace shortly after. The mole was never found. A sharp knock on the locker room door jolted her back to the present. It was Robert, her manager. His face was ashen. "Clara, Mr. Blackwood, he wants to see you. Now." "Robert, No, you don't understand," he hissed, his voice trembling. He didn't ask. He demanded. He cleared his guest out, told him the meeting was over. "He's waiting in the private dining room." "What in God's name did you say to him?" Clara's mind raced. This was it, the confrontation. Running was no longer an option. He knew the name. She had to know how. She smoothed down her apron, a futile gesture of normalcy, in a situation that was anything but. "It's okay, Robert." It was a misunderstanding. He looked at her, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "He doesn't look misunderstood, Clara. He looks like he's about to buy this restaurant just to have the pleasure of firing everyone in it." She walked past him, her head held high. As she approached the private dining room, the solarium, she saw 2 large men in dark suits standing outside the door. They weren't restaurant security. They were professionals. Their eyes tracked her with a practiced, unsettling intensity. One of them opened the door for her without a word. The solarium was Aria's most exclusive space, a small room with a glass ceiling that looked up at the glittering New York skyline. Damian Blackwood stood by the window, his back to her, staring out at the city he owned a significant piece of. The table was empty except for a bottle of water and 2 glasses. He didn't turn around as she entered. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing them in. "Close the blinds," he commanded. His voice was different now. The earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a tone as cold and sharp as surgical steel. Clara moved to the wall panel and pressed the button. Motorized blinds descended, plunging the room into an intimate, shadowed space lit only by a single dim lamp on the table. The glittering city vanished. "Who are you?" he asked, still not turning. "My name is Clara Evans. I'm your waitress." He finally turned his face, unreadable, his eyes burning with an intensity that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Don't play games with me. The name on your application is almost certainly a fake. Your social security number is probably clean, but it'll be a ghost, no credit history before 2 years ago. You speak Damascus Arabic like you were born there, and you know a code name from a blown intelligence operation that got a man killed. So I'll ask you again, who are you?" Clara's carefully constructed world had not just been cracked, it had been shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. She was no longer Clara Evans' waitress. She was standing in a room with a man who impossibly held a key to the life she had tried to cremate. "That depends," she replied, her voice steady, despite the tremor she felt deep inside. "Who are you to know the name of a dead man?" Blackwood took a step closer, his 6'3" frame looming over her. The scent of expensive cologne and power filled the small space. "I'm the man who funded the operation," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The Falcon was my asset, and his death cost me $500 million in destabilized assets. Not to mention the man's life. So you can imagine my surprise when a waitress who serves me wine tells me she's buried men who knew his name. You have 60 seconds to tell me who you are and what you know before my men out there start digging into your life in a way you won't like. 60 seconds, starting now." The 60 seconds Damian Blackwood offered felt both like an eternity and no time at all. Clara's mind worked furiously, processing the new terrifying variable he had just thrown into the equation. He funded the operation. Private funding for covert intelligence was a grey area, a murky world where men like Blackwood could operate beyond the official oversight of governments. It was dangerous, deniable, and explained how he could know a name like the Falcon. It also meant he was powerful in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. She could lie, create a story, but he was a man who feasted on lies for breakfast. He would see through it in a heartbeat. The only currency she had in this room was the truth, or at least a carefully curated version of it. "My name," she began, her voice low, "and even is not Clara Evans. That's the name I was given when I left Damascus." Blackwood's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He just listened, his entire posture one of coiled, predatory attention. "I was a diplomatic translator at the U.S. Embassy," she continued. "My official title was Senior Language and Cultural Attaché. Unofficially, I was a communications handler for certain high-value assets. The Falcon was one of them." A flicker of something recognition confirmation passed through Blackwood's eyes. He had clearly done his homework, or was doing it in real time. He probably had a team somewhere tearing through databases looking for a woman matching her description who had vanished from the Middle East 3 years ago. "You were Tariq's handler." He asked the use of the Falcon's real name a clear test. She confirmed, a fresh pang of guilt twisting in her gut. I was the last person he spoke to. What was his last message? Blackwood pressed his voice, relentless. This was the core of it, the secret she had carried like a shard of glass in her heart for 3 years. He said the operation was compromised. From the inside, he mentioned a name. Julian. He said Julian sold the intel to the regime's intelligence services. Then the line went dead. Blackwood's expression remained stony, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. Julian Croft, State Department. He was Ambassador Hayes's Deputy Chief of Mission. He was on my payroll, too. Clara felt a wave of nausea. Julian. Of course. He had always been too smooth, too ambitious. He had access to everything. And he was on Blackwood's payroll. This was more complex than she had ever imagined. Croft was investigated, Clara said, her voice hollow. The internal review found insufficient evidence. He was quietly reassigned to a desk job in Brussels. Ambassador Hayes was forced into early retirement to sweep it all under the rug. A desk job. Blackwood repeated the words, dripping with contempt. He betrayed us, got a good man killed, cost me a fortune, and they gave him a desk job. He paced the small room like a caged panther. The official channels failed, so I decided to pursue an unofficial one. He stopped and turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers with a frightening intensity. For 3 years I have been hunting Julian Croft. Not the man pushing papers in Brussels, but the man who operates in the shadows, who launders money for the very people he used to fight against. I have tracked him, studied his network, and I have finally cornered him. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. In 3 days I have a meeting in Geneva. It's the culmination of a year-long sting operation. I am posing as a buyer for a portfolio of illicit assets that Croft is brokering. My partner, Mr. Al-Jamil, is the face of the investment group. The final negotiation, however, will not be in English. Croft insists on using Arabic for the sensitive details, believing it adds a layer of security, a language he thinks he has mastered. Clara could see where this was going. Her heart began to pound again this time. Not with fear, but with a terrifying sense of inevitability. My translator, the man I've had on my team for 6 months, had a conveniently timed accident this morning. Blackwood said, his voice flat. A hit and run. He'll live, but he won't be talking for weeks. I am convinced Croft was behind it. He's testing me, trying to see if I'll back out, if I'm bluffing. I cannot back out. This is my only chance to get him. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the only sign that this crusade was taking a personal toll. I need a translator, he stated. It wasn't a question, it was a declaration. I need someone who not only speaks the language flawlessly, but understands the subtext, the nuance, the lies. Someone who knows the world Julian Croft comes from. I need someone who has as much reason to want him to pay for what he did as I do. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something other than arrogance or power in his eyes. It was a raw, calculated desperation. He hadn't just been mocking her in the restaurant. He had been speaking in a specific dialect, dropping a highly specific codename. It was a shot in the dark, a 1 in a billion chance that someone somewhere in this city might react. He had been casting a line, and she had taken the bait. This is insane, Clara breathed, shaking her head. I left that life behind. I am a waitress. You were never a waitress, he countered, his voice dropping to a persuasive murmur. You're a ghost, hiding in plain sight, punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. You think scrubbing tables and pouring wine will wash the blood off your hands. It won't. He gestured around the opulent room. This is your chance. Not just to get justice for Tarek, but to get your life back. Croft knows your old name, your old face. He probably assumes you're dead or irrelevant. You would be the last person he'd ever expect to see. He named a number, a figure so astronomical it made her head spin. That's what I will pay you for 3 days of your time. When it's over, you'll have enough money to disappear properly. A new identity, a new life anywhere in the world. No more hiding in aprons and living in fear. It was a devil's bargain. He was offering her everything she thought she wanted, freedom, security, and a chance at redemption. But the price was to step back into the very world that had almost destroyed her, to face the man who haunted her nightmares. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "You're a man who plays with spies and money like they're chess pieces. For all I know, you're the one who betrayed him." Blackwood didn't flinch. "Because Tariq wasn't just an asset to me. He was the son of an old friend who asked me to get him out of Syria. I failed. This isn't about money anymore. It's about a debt I have to pay." His sincerity was startling, a crack in the formidable armor he wore. He extended a hand. Not to shake, but as an open gesture. "This is your choice. Go back to your locker change out of your uniform and walk out that door. I'll have my men erase any trace of this conversation. You can go back to being Clara Evans, the invisible waitress, or you can step into the car that's waiting for you downstairs, and you can help me finish what we both started 3 years ago." The air crackled with the weight of her decision. Outside the door was the safety of her cage. Inside the car was the terrifying, uncertain wilderness of her past. But for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of the woman she used to be, a woman who didn't run from a fight. She looked at his hand, then back to his face. She took a deep breath, the sterile, conditioned air of the restaurant, feeling thin and meaningless. "Where is the car?" she asked. A ghost. That's what Damien Blackwood had called her. And as she sat in the silent, leather-scented interior of his Maybach, speeding through the neon-slicked streets of Manhattan, Clara felt the truth of it. The Clara Evans persona, the one who worried about tips and polished wine glasses, was already fading, sloughing off like a snake's skin. Underneath, a different woman was emerging, someone sharper, more alert, her senses heightened to a degree she hadn't felt in years. They didn't speak during the ride. Blackwood was on his phone, his voice a low, clipped murmur as he issued a string of commands. "Scrub the Aria reservation. Pull all CCTV from the block. I want a full workup on Julian Croft's current associates, focus on Geneva. And get me everything on Ambassador Robert Hayes's post-retirement activity." Clara watched the city lights blur past her reflection, a pale, determined face in the window. She was processing the sheer speed of the transition. An hour ago, her biggest concern was whether a table would be satisfied with their steak. Now she was part of a privately funded intelligence operation, hunting a traitor on another continent. The car descended into a private garage beneath a sleek, anonymous glass tower in Soho. The doors to a private elevator slid open directly in front of them. Blackwood led her inside, his presence filling the small space. They ascended in silence to the penthouse. The apartment was less a home and more a command center, sprawling minimalist with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the entire city. But instead of art, the walls were dominated by a bank of monitors displaying stock tickers, news feeds, and satellite maps. A team of 3 analysts, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in sharp, casual attire, were working silently at a long, obsidian black table. They didn't even look up as Blackwood entered. "This is Catherine," Blackwood said, gesturing to the woman who had sharp features and wore a headset. "She's my chief analyst. You'll be working with her. She'll bring you up to speed." Catherine finally looked up, her gaze analytical and missing any hint of surprise. It was clear she was used to her boss bringing strangers into the fold. "Ma'am," she said, with a crisp nod. "Get her a secure laptop and access to the Falcon Archive, Level 1 clearance," Blackwood commanded. "I want her to review every piece of intel we have on Croft, every communication, every financial transaction. She needs to know his entire network before we land in Geneva." He then turned to Clara. "There's a bedroom through there," he said, pointing to a stark white hallway. "You'll find clothes, toiletries, anything you might need. A private jet is on standby at Teterboro. We leave in 6 hours." And with that, he strode away to his own office, the glass door sliding shut behind him, leaving Clara alone in the heart of the machine. Catherine motioned for her to sit, sliding a slim, encrypted laptop in front of her. "He doesn't do pleasantries," Catherine said, her voice matter-of-fact, "but he's the best at what he does. Welcome to the team, I guess." For the next 5 hours, Clara didn't move. The world outside ceased to exist. She was consumed by the data on the screen. It was all there, the raw intelligence. Tariq had provided surveillance photos, bank transfers across shell corporations in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. It was a dark, tangled web of deceit, and at its center was Julian Croft. Reading the files was like reliving a nightmare in high definition. She saw the transcripts of her own coded communications with Tariq, her own words staring back at her from the screen. She saw the insufficient evidence report from the State Department, a clinical bureaucratic whitewashing of a man's murder. But Blackwood's team had gone deeper. They had tracked Croft's movements after he left the State Department. He hadn't just taken a desk job. He had leveraged his old contacts and knowledge of covert operations to become a broker for the world's most dangerous players, rogue states arms dealers, terrorist financiers. He was selling the very secrets he had once sworn to protect. The current deal in Geneva was his masterpiece. He was brokering the sale of a next-generation cyber warfare suite, a program capable of crippling a nation's power grid or financial system, to a consortium represented by Mr. Al-Jamil. Blackwood's play was to pose as the money behind Al-Jamil, lure Croft into a position of vulnerability, and acquire irrefutable proof of his treason proof that couldn't be buried by diplomatic immunity. As she read the last pieces of Clara Evans, the timid waitress crumbled to dust. A cold, professional anger settled in its place. This wasn't just about Tariq anymore. It was about the sprawling, cancerous damage Croft was doing to the world. A file caught her eye. It was labeled Hayes Post. She clicked it open. It contained surveillance reports on her old boss, Ambassador Robert Hayes. Blackwood's team had been tracking him. Since his forced retirement, Hayes had been living a quiet life in Virginia, but there were oddities, several unexplained trips to Zurich, a series of encrypted calls to a number that Blackwood's team had flagged as belonging to one of Croft's known associates. A sickening thought began to form in Clara's mind. The official story was that Hayes was a good man who had been outmaneuvered by his treacherous deputy. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if the betrayal was bigger than just Julian Croft? She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Blackwood approach until he was standing beside her. He placed a cup of black coffee on the table. "Find anything interesting?" he asked. Clara pointed to the screen. "Ambassador Hayes. You think he was involved?" Blackwood's expression was grim. Hayes was a patriot, but he was also a proud man who felt his country betrayed him by forcing him out. And proud, bitter men can make compromises. I don't have proof, just a pattern that I don't like. It's possible Croft is still using him, or that Hayes is a willing partner. That's another loose end we need to tie up." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "You holding up? I'm fine," she said, and for the first time it was the absolute truth. The fear and guilt were still there, but they had been forged into something else purpose. "Croft's Arabic," she said, thinking aloud. He was always proficient, but he had a distinct Cairene accent from his time in Egypt. He'll be listening for it. My dialect is pure Damascus. He'll notice the difference. "Good," Blackwood replied. Let him think you're just a standard-issue translator from Syria. He won't connect you to the American handler from the embassy. Your old personnel file lists your language skills as fluent, but it doesn't specify dialect. It's a small detail, but it could be the blind spot that gives us an edge. He tapped a key on the laptop, bringing up a grainy surveillance photo. It was Julian Croft exiting a hotel in Dubai. He looked older, his face harder, but it was unmistakably him. The man who had smiled at her in embassy meetings while orchestrating Tariq's death. "He's arrogant," Blackwood said. "That's his weakness. He thinks he's the smartest man in any room. In Geneva, he'll be in a room with you. Let's make sure that's the last mistake he ever makes." 6 hours after walking out of Aria, Clara was on a Gulfstream G650, climbing high above the Atlantic. She had traded her waitress uniform for a tailored black pantsuit that had been waiting for her. She looked not like a waitress, but like what she was, a weapon polished and aimed. Across from her, Damien Blackwood reviewed final preparations with Catherine via a secure video link. The ghost was no longer hiding. She was back in the machine, and she was flying into the heart of the storm. Geneva was a city of quiet, lethal neutrality. Nestled on the serene shores of its lake, it was a place where fortunes were hidden, secrets were traded, and wars were conducted not with armies, but with whispered conversations in the hushed lobbies of grand hotels. It was the perfect stage for the final act of Damien Blackwood's long game. They landed at a private airfield and were whisked away in a convoy of black sedans. Clara was installed in a suite at the Beau Rivage Hotel, with a panoramic view of the lake and the Jet d'Eau. It was a world away from her cramped Brooklyn apartment, but the luxury was a cage no matter how gilded. One of Blackwood's security men, a stoic former Mossad agent named Gavriel, was stationed outside her door. She was no longer a free agent. She was a critical asset to be protected at all costs. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon in a secure suite at a rival hotel, the Mandarin Oriental, chosen by Croft as neutral ground. The intervening 24 hours were a blur of intense preparation. Clara Blackwood and Mr. Al-Jamil, who had flown in from Riyadh to join them, huddled in Blackwood's suite, which had been converted into a tactical operations center. Mr. Al-Jamil was a shrewd, calm man in his late 60s, a trusted business partner of Blackwood's for over a decade. He would be the face of the deal the pious but greedy Saudi investor Croft would expect to see. Clara's role was to be the quiet, efficient translator present, but unnoticed. Blackwood would be introduced as Mr. Thorne, Al-Jamil's fiercely private financial advisor, who spoke no Arabic. It was a carefully constructed play, a theater of mirrors designed to prey on Croft's prejudices and arrogance. "He will underestimate both of you," Blackwood explained, pacing before them. "He will see Faisal as a cliché, a rich Arab he can easily manipulate. He will see you," he set his eyes on Clara, "as a local, hire a piece of furniture. He will direct all his real attention to me trying to gauge the true power in the room. That's when you two will do the real work." He turned to Clara. "Listen to everything. Not just the words he says, but the words he doesn't say. Listen for hesitation. Listen for names, places, anything that doesn't fit the context of the cyber warfare deal. He might be running a side deal. He might be planning a double cross. Your job is to be my ears and my instincts. The night before the meeting, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of her suite, watching the lights twinkle on the water. The ghost of Tariq felt closer than ever. Was this justice, or was it just revenge wrapped in the cold logic of finance and geopolitics? Did it even matter? Her thoughts drifted to Ambassador Hayes. Was he truly a traitor, or just a broken old man being used as a pawn by his former protégé? She had accessed his file again, on the flight, reading the transcripts of his calls. They were cryptic, but one phrase stuck out, a line Hayes had used in a call to Croft's associate. "Tell him the Geneva package is ready, but the courier has some reservations." Package. Courier. It was agency jargon. Was Hayes talking about himself, or was he referring to something or someone else? The next day, the air in the car on the way to the Mandarin Oriental was thick with tension. Clara felt a strange calm settle over her. It was the focus that came before a high-stakes translation, the moment when the self had to disappear, leaving only the language as the bridge between two worlds. She was dressed in a conservative grey suit, her hair pulled back her face, devoid of makeup. She was the picture of professional anonymity. Blackwood, as Mr. Thorne, was dressed in a dark, severe suit, his expression impassive. Mr. Al-Jamil looked every bit the part of a wealthy sheikh, projecting an air of relaxed authority. They were met in the lobby and escorted to a private suite on the top floor, and there, standing by the window with his back to them, was Julian Croft. He turned as they entered, a confident, predatory smile on his face. He hadn't aged well. The boyish charm she remembered from the embassy was gone, replaced by the hard, cynical look of a man who had seen and done terrible things. But the arrogance was still there, brighter and more potent than ever. His eyes swept the room, assessing them. He greeted Mr. Al-Jamil warmly in Arabic, then gave Blackwood a brief, dismissive nod. His gaze passed over Clara with barely a flicker of interest, just as Blackwood had predicted. He saw a translator, nothing more. "Welcome, Faisal," Croft said in Arabic, his Cairene accent pronounced. "I am glad we could finally meet face to face. And this is your advisor." "This is Mr. Thorne," Al-Jamil replied in Arabic, playing his part perfectly. "His discretion is as legendary as his financial acumen. He is here to observe." Clara translated the exchange for Blackwood in a low, monotone English, her voice carefully neutral. They sat down. The suite was clean, almost sterile. Blackwood's team had already swept it for bugs, but Croft's team had likely swept it again. Everyone was on edge. Croft began the presentation. He spoke of the cyber warfare suite, its capabilities, its deniability. He was a masterful salesman, weaving a tapestry of power and profit. Clara translated faithfully her mind, a split screen, one part processing the literal meaning, the other analyzing every nuance, every flicker of his eyes, every subtle shift in tone. Half an hour in, Croft paused for a drink of water. He leaned back, the picture of confidence. "Of course," he said to Al-Jamil, "the true value is not just the software, but the key, a backdoor access code that gives the user control over the developer's entire network. It is a unique failsafe. And it is, of course, priced accordingly." "And the delivery of this key?" Al-Jamil asked. Croft smiled. "It is not a physical object. It's a sequence held by a trusted third party. A courier, if you will. Once your funds are confirmed in escrow, the courier will transmit the sequence to you. It's the ultimate guarantee of security for all parties." Clara's blood went cold. Courier. The word from Hayes's phone call. She translated Croft's words for Blackwood, her voice betraying no emotion. But as she spoke, she made a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture with her left hand, a prearranged signal to Blackwood that she had heard something significant, something off script. Blackwood's eyes, which had been half closed in a feigned look of boredom, sharpened almost invisibly. Croft continued oblivious. The courier is an old hand, completely reliable. He has a certain diplomatic background which makes him untouchable. It was a mistake, a piece of vanity. Croft couldn't resist hinting at the cleverness of his scheme. He was talking about Ambassador Hayes. Hayes wasn't just a pawn. He was the linchpin of the entire deal. He held the key. The pieces clicked into place in Clara's mind. This wasn't just about selling a weapon. Croft was using his old boss, a man with diplomatic immunity, to hold the most valuable piece of the transaction, insulating himself from the actual crime. If the deal went south, Hayes would be the one caught holding the bag a disgraced former ambassador, selling state secrets. Croft would be long gone. It was the ultimate betrayal. Clara had to get a message to Blackwood, something more specific than a hand signal. She needed to warn him that Hayes was the courier, that the trap was more complicated than they'd thought, but how she couldn't break character. Then an idea sparked, a desperate, dangerous gamble that would use her skills not just to translate, but to manipulate. As Croft detailed the escrow requirements, Clara began her translation to Blackwood. She reported Croft's words faithfully, but at the end of a sentence, she added a single quiet phrase in English, blending it so seamlessly that it sounded like part of the translation. "The funds must be wired to a bank in Zurich," she translated, then added, "Robert's package is the key," and then continued without a pause, at which point the transfer protocol will be initiated. She had used the ambassador's first name, Robert. It was a risk. Would Blackwood catch it? Across the table, Damien Blackwood gave no outward sign. He just blinked slowly once. But Clara, who had been studying him for days, saw it the infinitesimal tightening of the muscles around his eyes. He had heard her. He understood. The game had just changed, and Julian Croft had no idea that the ghost from his past was sitting 3 feet away, silently dismantling his empire, one word at a time. The suite had become a battleground of words. The pretense of a business deal had vanished, replaced by a tense interrogation conducted through a single, quiet woman. Blackwood, through Clara, relentlessly probed the weak points in Julian Croft's story, circling closer to the truth with every translated phrase. The deal, Croft explained with smug satisfaction, hinged on the delivery of a digital key by a trusted courier. "He's an old hand," Croft said in Arabic, "someone with a certain diplomatic background which makes him untouchable." As Clara translated the words for Blackwood, a cold certainty washed over her. Hayes. The courier was her old boss. She relayed Croft's statement, but her tone was a weapon in itself, infusing the word diplomatic with a chilling weight that was impossible to miss. Across the table, Blackwood's eyes narrowed. He understood. The trap was more intricate than they had imagined. Sensing the shift, Croft grew agitated. "The courier's identity is not part of this negotiation," he snapped. Clara began to translate his hostile response, then paused. She broke character with the precision of a surgeon. Looking directly at Blackwood, she switched to flawless, unaccented English. "He also says," she added her voice, cutting through the air like glass, "that the deal is as secure as the promises he once made to Ambassador Hayes in Damascus." The effect was a detonation. Croft stared, his face draining of all color as he struggled to connect the anonymous translator with the ghost from his past. Who are you?" he stammered, his arrogance finally shattering. Damien Blackwood rose slowly to his feet, his shadow falling over the table. "She's the ghost you failed to kill, Julian," he said, his voice a low growl. "And your courier, I'm afraid Ambassador Hayes, has been detailing your entire treasonous network to some old friends at the State Department for the past hour." Checkmate. Panic exploded in Croft's eyes. His life's work of betrayal had crumbled in minutes. In a desperate final act, he lunged across the table, grabbing the elderly Mr. Al-Jamil and holding a silver letter opener to his throat. "Nobody moves!" he screamed. "I walk out of here, or he dies!" Blackwood's security team burst in, weapons drawn, but were forced to halt. But Croft, in his panic, had forgotten the translator. While all eyes were on the hostage, Clara moved with silent purpose. Her hand slammed an unmarked panel on the wall. With a heavy whir, blackout shutters descended, plunging the room into absolute disorienting darkness. Croft cried out in shock. In the pitch black, Clara's voice was the only point of reference, a calm command in Blackwood's earpiece, directing his security team. A single heavy thud echoed, and then silence. When the lights returned, Julian Croft was on the floor. His empire and his freedom finished. It was over-ended not by a bullet, but by the quiet waitress he had never even seen. The aftermath was as swift and silent as Blackwood's business dealings. Back in the presidential suite overlooking Lake Geneva, the tension had evaporated, leaving a quiet clarity. Julian Croft was a ghost in a system he could no longer manipulate, his fate sealed. Damien Blackwood gestured to a briefcase on the polished table. "The payment we agreed on," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Along with a new, clean identity. You can be anyone, anywhere. The ghost you were meant to be." For 3 years that had been her only dream. But standing there, having faced the man who broke her life, she knew hiding was no longer an option. It was just a different kind of cage. "I don't want to disappear," she said, her voice steady as she looked out at the setting sun. "I'm not a ghost anymore. I know who I am." A slow, genuine smile touched Blackwood's lips. He saw not a victim, but an equal. "Good," he said, "because I have another offer. That briefcase buys you an easy life, or you can have a difficult one running a foundation I fund. It helps people like us, the ones who get burned and left behind. It's dangerous, thankless work, and it pays a fraction of what's in that case." He was offering her a choice between a comfortable existence and a meaningful one. Clara looked at the briefcase, a lifetime of quiet safety sitting on the table. Then she met his gaze, seeing a future filled with purpose, not silence. The choice was never really a choice at all. "When do I start?" she asked. Clara's story isn't just about a shocking comeback or a billionaire's surprise. It's a powerful reminder that we all have hidden depths, skills, and pasts that make us who we are. It shows that the quietest person in the room is often the most observant, and that true strength isn't about the power you display, but the courage you hold within. She walked into that restaurant as a ghost, hiding from her past, but walked out as the master of her future, proving that it's never too late to reclaim your voice and rewrite your own story. What did you think of Clara's incredible journey? Do you believe Damien did the right thing in the end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of courage and redemption, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a story where the underdog comes out on top. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another incredible true life drama. Thank you for watching.